Hello, and welcome to Rob from the Internet Talks About Beer, a show where we discuss different styles of beer, beer history, beer flavor profiles. We give shout outs to breweries we think do exceptional beer, and we talk about whatever else happens to come to mind during the course of our conversation. I'm Rob from the Internet. Let's talk about beer. All right, joining me today is Laura Lodge. Today's show is going to be a slightly different format than normal. We're not talking about any specific style of beer or its history today. We're going to be talking about a variety of topics as they apply to doing flights and visiting breweries and possibly food pairings and things like that. So I'm going to let Laura primarily lead today's conversation. I will be asking questions to try and take things in directions that I want to go. We'll see how this turns out for everybody. To start today, instead of a specific beer style, I chose an interesting beer out of the cooler. I have a 2019 Origin of Darkness Baltic Porter. It's a collaboration between Collective Arts and Siren Craft Brewing. It's a rum barrel aged Baltic Porter with raisins, dates, and prunes. It's a fantastic beer. Comes in at about 9.5% alcohol. It's got a really, really dark color. It's very low carbonation because it is a barrel aged beer. It's got a fantastic dark fruit aroma when you bring it up towards your face. I mean, you really smell the dates and the prunes, and then you get that kind of rich earthiness that you get when you barrel age beers. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, and it's got the consistency of almost like motor oil. It's very thick. It coats your mouth, and you get like a leathery taste out of it, and you get that really what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the flavors that you get from if you're eating prunes and dates. I mean that really dark tree fruits. I mean,
Jammy kind of.
yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, this is obviously not a beer you can just walk into any store and pick because it was a special collab from 2019. I bought several of them at the time, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to trot one out and show it off.
Well, it was interesting when you were talking about what you wanted the show to focus on or what you usually focus on. What came to mind was if you choose a beer with so much going on and you're trying to describe it to somebody who's never ever tasted beer, which of those flavors would you pick to talk about? Sometimes with porters, I might talk about maybe a little bit of chocolate. There are some flavors that people understand.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, so this one, the chocolate actually takes a little bit of a back seat to the fruit flavors.
right?
It's definitely there. It comes in more towards the middle of the tasting of it. So when you've got it in your mouth and you're just about ready to swallow, when you do that last little bit, you get the chocolate on the end there, but it's not as prominent as it is in say a standard porter or a standard stout where the chocolate is pretty forward.
Right. Do you get a little bit of vanilla from the barrels, or is that masked by the jamminess
It's masked by the fruit, at least to my palate. And I have to
and the
admit,
rum?
yeah, and I don't have the world's most refined palate because I have a fairly off sense of smell. So the flavors have to be really strong or prominent for me to really pick up on them.
To
Some of the
come
more
through?
subtle flavor, yeah, some of the more subtle flavors get lost on my damaged olfactory system.
I have found over time through experimentation that a lot of times people can get past their initial hesitancy or reluctance to try a beer if they're looking for something. So if they're looking for chocolate, or if they're looking for the fig, or if they're looking for leather, or if they're looking for cigar or deep dark something in this
Right.
particular case, I think that it's interesting to kind of give them a mission, um, so that they're open to exploring all of it, but there's not really, you don't want to say there's not an option to not like it, but there's kind of a challenge there in the works to really explore it. So there's not really a window to say, oh, it's awful.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I just realized I skipped over one of the most important parts of the show after giving people your name. Tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got into craft beer, and what it is you do.
Gotcha. Well, let's just start from where we are right now, because that's really the most interesting and relevant part of our discussion today. One of the best, coolest things I have had the opportunity to do is to create craft beer programs for destination resorts. So my home is Vail, Colorado. So definitely a ski
Lucky
town,
you.
lots of tourists. Um, and it's really interesting to be able to be given a blank canvas and be told, um, create what you think fits what we do, who we are, our staff, our menu, our chefs, our culinary program, what would really enhance marketing and help to bring people to our destination. And the general manager asked me to do that. The Vail Cascade was the first program I got to design. And he said, you know what, you know beer, and we can talk about how I got to that point also, but you know beer and you're connected in the community. So I want to be the destination in the Vail Valley. Nobody else is really doing that. So it was really neat to be able to say, okay, what do we want to put on the list? How adventurous and creative do we want to be? Let's take a stab at what kind of drinkers our guests are going to be. Are they going to be adventurous? Are they going to be conservative? One of the things you know automatically as a tourist destination in Colorado is that you have to have Fat Tire and you have to have Coors Light. So
Obviously, yeah.
you always keep them on the list, but in my experience and with the programs that I design, they are in a bottle or a can and they're not on draft because you're really looking to show off the things that are unexpected. You want to
Makes
have the
sense.
expected, but you want to show off the unexpected. And so it was really interesting to think I have six tap handles. What do I want people to see first? How often would I want those to change? It's rotation nation now, but thinking about repeat guests to hotels, different seasons of the year, what comfort level do people need and how creative do you think they want to be? And then to add to that, what kind of information do we want to include on the menu? How descriptive, to your description of the beer, which was fantastic, how much do we want to offer in terms of education and in terms of expectation on our menu? And how much do we want to train the staff? What time do we want to put in? Do we want to bring in the kitchen staff as well? Do we want to have some promotional events with different breweries that we're showcasing on the menu? It was really cool to figure out, how do you want to stock it? How do you want to do inventory? How do you want to pick what's there?
That
Um,
that sounds like it would be a large task, but it sounds like it would be a really interesting and fun task.
It was, and I got to work with the staff and I got to work with the guests. And on bad days, I could hide in the cooler and do inventory. There's there's lots of ways to work that. But it was really the most fun work job that I've had. I had to do other number crunching to justify my existence at the time, but it was really cool to be able to say our Friday night special flight this week is going to be XYZ. And some of it was stuff people were reluctant to try, and some of it was stuff that we'd gotten short dated, and some of it was, that kind of stuff. Um, but it's really interesting. And I think to the point of your show completely, to think about the guest that comes in and hasn't tried beer before, to say, how are we going to reach out to that person and engage them when their mindset is, I'll have a gin and tonic? How are we going to encourage them to try things? And so there were a number of successful things, and flights being one of the things that was enormously successful, was really an opportunity to present this experiential, because that's the buzzword for what people want, especially when they're on vacation, right?
Yes.
This opportunity to explore and to make it a valid mission, really, for them to explore their own palate, where there's no right or wrong. and to give enough of a description on the beers with the flight so that people felt like they had a roadmap and they could explore and they could share it. And generally speaking, a flight is a value if you want to split it down by ounces. Um, so it's really an interesting phenomenon that this experimental opportunity can really get people to try new things. And I really think that it pays for itself. In my experience, a person who purchases a flight usually picks a favorite and orders a pint. So it's an upsell.
Yeah,
Um,
no, most definitely. I know when I go to a brewery that I've never been to before, the first thing I'll do is I'll order a flight and like, well, recent history. I was on vacation up in the northern part of Ontario here. We went to a brewery and they had the option you could get a 4 beer flight or you get an 8 beer flight. The 8 beer had every beer they made on tap that they had at the current time. I'm like, well, give me that. I want to try every beer you have. And yeah, of those, I found 2 that I thought were right in my wheelhouse, ones that I thought were fantastic. And I did. I ordered a pint of each of them after I was done. So it is an upsell.
nice.
It's like, well, I don't like this as much. I like this one the best. So I'm going to get another one of these. And then we ended up stopping there on our way home and picking up beer to bring home.
Very nice. Triple sell. I've also discovered that the staff hates flights. So so you have to really frame it for them if you're the one that is presenting it as a good experience for the guest. You really need to frame it also as you're increasing your check average, you're increasing, therefore, your gratuity, you're increasing the engagement of the guest with the staff of the brewery or of the restaurant. And all those touch points usually equate to better gratuity. And so if you kind of frame it that way, they're a little less annoyed with the fact that you want them to pour 5 or 8, in this case, beers instead of one, and have this
Right.
obnoxious paddle or demonstration display thing that I think is really cool to put on the table. And so I think that there's a fine line that you walk as a business owner or a manager of a restaurant or whatever, if you're asking your staff to do that. But I also think that if you're adequately staffed, it's going to really help your check average. And another thing that I have also seen is that if you pair your flight or pair your pints, pair your beers with food that's on your menu. It's another way for the staff to connect again with the guest and say, hey, if you're going to order that Baltic Porter, I would really, really suggest it as an after dinner drink with this hot fudge sundae, whatever. But vanilla ice cream sounds like it might be awesome with that beer. Um,
It probably would be.
whether you would want to uh, I don't know. I don't know that you'd want to do that to that fine of a beer. But it might be nice to try just a little bit. I don't think I'd want to do that with the whole beer.
Yeah, well, what I think would pair really well with this is if you had like a gourmet vanilla, like with a Madagascar bourbon vanilla bean ice cream, and just serve
Right.
like a single scoop of the ice cream with the beer, and say, take a bite of the ice cream. When you're done with
Mhm.
the ice cream, take a sip of the beer and see how they play off each other. I think that would work really well for this style of beer. Now,
Right.
obviously, it's going to be different for every style of beer, but yeah, I think that would work. I think that would work quite well. This definitely would fall into my normal. This would be a dessert beer, and you would share it with your friends because it is a higher ABV, and it's not something that you need to drink the whole 2 pints that comes in this size bottle.
Mhm. Yeah, share with friends is a good idea. One of the other things that I've done is I run the Big Beers, Belgians, and Barley Wines Festival, which is held every January in Breckenridge. And one of the things that we have done, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary in 2020 before the world stopped. And um, one of the things we do is we have beer pairing dinners, and we have 2 breweries that will host each of the dinners, and each course is paired with a beer from each brewery. So it's a culinary challenge for the chefs. And I have found some really cool pairings that have happened with beers like the one you're drinking today, where they take venison or a really strongly flavored piece of awesome meat, and then put a dry rub on it that's got crazy things going on. Or let the beer be the crazy things going on. It's really interesting to pair things like that with an entree and say, what do we want to, which of those flavors do we want to bring out? Do we want to have some sort of compote that has fig in it, and pull those fig flavors out? Do we want to feature, maybe pull out the chocolate with some dark chocolate in the rub, and try to highlight that? And it's super cool how much you can change, to your point, to change the food with the beer and to change the beer with the food. Oftentimes, I find if people don't like IPA bitterness, for example, if they have it with a specific cheese, it takes the edge off the hops. All of a sudden, everything is rosy, and it's just a magnificent, magical experience. And I think that those kinds of opportunities kind of need to be curated for you to be able to find them.
Yeah. So to that point exactly, one of the local breweries here to us, it's called Grain and Grit. Over the winter, they do beer and cheese pairings. So they've got
Nice.
the manager of their tap house is also a certified something or other, and she pairs beers with different cheeses that are sourced locally. So it's all stuff that you could go out and get yourself. You can get the beer from the brewery, and you could go to the store, or you could go to the farm markets, and you could pick up the same exact cheeses. And you're right. So I'm not a huge like West Coast IPA fan because they tend to be too bitter and too hoppy for me. But she had on two of the different beer and cheese pairings that we did. She had a West Coast style IPA with some of the local cheeses around here. Aaron, you're absolutely right. The cheese cut the bitterness and that hoppy flavor enough to where I was like, these two things together are fantastic. Separately, I would like the cheese, but I wouldn't really care for the beer. But when you put the two together, it was like a magical synergy happened, and it was like fireworks going off in your mouth.
That holy grail for sure. Um, and we did a number of brewmasters weekends as part of the program that I did at that particular event. But we've done that in other resorts that I've worked with too. And it's really neat to do small plates with a series of beers and to create the food based on the beer. Again, you need cool chefs to do that. But it's really neat to sit down with the chefs ahead of time and have them taste the beer and say, "Hey, I'd really love to pair this with XYZ." And then as a guest, when you come in, that's the point, is that holy grail exploration or adventure with every course. And I think that those opportunities are the ones that can really, really blow your mind with, where can my palate go?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's one of the things too is I've noticed that since I started dabbling in craft beer uh 20 years ago, my palate has significantly changed over the course of the years. So beers that I used to say, "Oh no, I can't drink that." Now I'm like, "Yeah, I can drink that if I'm having it with this." I know because through experience what things I can have different styles of beer with to enjoy them.
Mhm.
Whereas, it's not like when I was in my 20s, I would be like, oh, I won't drink that. It's not my style of beer. But now I'm like, oh, I'll drink that if I can pair it with something I know that will make it taste better for myself. And it's weird how your palate evolves like that.
It is. And I think a lot of it has to do with practice. And I'm sure nobody listening to this um, recording or this interview would have any issue with practice. Um, but I started my beer adventure as a drinker, not liking beer because I don't like hop bitterness. And the first beer that I enjoyed was Alexander Rodenbach, and the sour and the cherry really took care of any sort of hop bite that was there at all. And that was the
And,
beginning of my adventuring. And so when you're starting at the other end, because a lot of times if you start out with a lager and you like a little bit of that hoppiness, sours may be the last place you go. I was starting at the end and working um, backwards into Belgians and things like that, because they don't have traditionally a huge hoppy profile.
yeah.
So it's interesting to think about, and there's so many different ways you can go on a culinary level too, when I was creating a program with Gateway Canyons, we did s'mores pairings. What better, right? Everybody brings a beer of their choice, and you provide the marshmallows, the chocolate, and the graham crackers, and a fire. And really try all of the big beers that people would bring for an evening around the campfire or just the fire in your backyard.
Right.
To adventure with all those flavors and small glasses, of course, just because you want to try that many of them.
Yep. Yeah, and
And this,
you don't want to be completely trashed.
well, you lose the experience then.
Yep.
For sure. For big beers, we're up at like 9,500 feet in altitude. And so we have 1 ounce pours as a rule, because if you want to try, if you want to get the most you can out of the 500 plus beers that are there to try, you don't want to have any more than that, no matter how
Right.
amazing it is, or you're going to be done. And if you
Yep.
want to be
No,
done, you can just sit at the Sam Adams booth and drink Utopias until you're done. That's easy.
I mean, that's not a bad plan from my
It,
perspective, but
but given the other things that are available, it's an awful plan. But
well,
it's a good
yes.
plan. If you want to expedite your experience, there you go, you're done. Um, so it's really interesting um, to curate those experiences for people, so that when they're in the position you were and walking into a brewery that you hadn't been in before, they have a strategy, to be able to say, I want to figure out who this brewery is, what they represent, what matters to them, who they are as individuals, what's their brewing style, what's their direction, what do their graphics and marketing look like, and how is that reflected in their beer, or how is their beer reflected in all of those items, and that personality that makes them unique and special to who they are. And if you are still adventuring with your own palate, it's kind of a double adventure, right? To go through and see what kind of beers, who are they? So, and how do they resonate with who you are in your palate? I just think it's a really interesting way to explore their identity, that flight, because there's so many. If you just pick one randomly off the board, you may not like it.
This is true. Well,
And
and that's
then,
the beauty of flights.
right. And then you're done. And you had a not great experience because the one beer that you picked either wasn't their thing or wasn't your thing or both.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I've met many people in my travels who like, oh, well, they make terrible beer. I'm like, well, what beer did you try? Well, I had
Mhm.
such and such beer. And is that a style you'd normally like? Well, I don't know. Well, then why did you choose to get a pint of that beer when the place? And honestly, today, 99% of breweries or tap houses offer flights. I
Mhm.
mean, there's no excuse for you to go in blind and say, I want a pint of this. You know, if you're not sure, try a few in a flight, and you might find ones that you absolutely hate. You might find ones that you absolutely adore. I mean, that's the beauty of the flight.
True. And in most places, certainly not all, you might be able to get a short pour if they don't have flights. You might be able to get samples if they don't have flights. Really, truly buying 16 ounces of something that you haven't tried is it's kind of crazy.
Yeah,
And then
unless you're
then
me.
okay, well, but then don't write a review on it, right? If you don't like it, because
Correct.
you don't want to trash the brewery because that wasn't really up your alley, because the hops that they use are really not your thing. I mean, it's
Right.
just interesting to see how people choose to adventure. And I think that sometimes they need to be guided into a strategic approach. And if you offer that flight, I think that that's a good way, even if your staff is not super on board. I think that you're going to get more positive reviews and more positive interactions given the variability of where you can go from there.
So when you're developing a program for, say, a resort,
Mhm.
and you're saying, hey, we should do flights. Now, do you typically try to curate the flights yourself, or do you bring someone else in to help you figure out what would work best, or how what I guess what's your basic process? I mean, I don't want any of your proprietary trade secrets, but what's your basic process for helping resorts figure out if they should just curate a flight or if they should just offer flights?
Well, first of all, the mission really is to customize their program to them. So I always sit down with the person who's curating their beer program and whoever the lead bartender or staff member is that's going to be on the floor that's the most experienced. When we usually have more than two people, but and sit down with them and brainstorm what they want to focus on. Do they want to focus on local products? Do they want to focus on American products? Do they want to focus on, in this case, Colorado products? Do they want to have a full international list? And then another question that's part of that process is, what do you want to showcase on draft? And it doesn't make sense in the big picture to do flights out of a bottle, or a can, because the cost, if you don't use the rest of it, is prohibitive.
Right.
So only do that if you're trying to get rid of something and you are have it on special, right? Because that night you're more guaranteed to go through it. So once you have kind of identified local, state, regional, national, international, then you can kind of look at what your draft handles need to represent to get you to that message to the guest. So if you're going to be local, then everything you have on draft needs to be local, and your flight will be a selection of what's on draft. And depending on what their customer base looks like and how much time people usually spend at that location, blah, 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 then maybe your flight is 4, 6, 8 different beers. Another question that's really interesting is, do you want the customer to be able to choose the beers in their flight, or do you want to set a fixed flight or multiple fixed flights? And obviously it's like the pick six in the liquor store. It's awesome from the customer's perspective to be able to choose, but then you run the risk of never pouring one of your beers
That's
and
true.
not going through it. So it might be most wise from a business owner perspective to fix your flights. Maybe you have a couple options, but make sure some of your slower moving beers are included in that. Um, and there's also the question of presentation. So when you're talking about flights, sometimes people pick really cool things to put the flights in, whether it's round or whether it's a bridge or whether
Right.
it's, I mean, there's all sorts of things. But most of the places that I have developed programs for have very limited storage space. So you're really looking at, and I'm always talking about you want to have proper glassware, but there's a practical piece there too. So maybe practical proper glassware is a nonic pint that just has that little kind of bubble at the top,
Yep.
um, and a
Love the
tulip.
Nonic pint.
Well, so much better than an iced tea mixing shaker glass, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
the shaker pints, I mean, they get wet, they slip out of your hand. At least with the Nonic pint, you got that bubble if your hands are wet, and if it falls over, you're not going to break the lip on it. So,
right. And if you want a fun exercise at some time, get the shaker pint, get the nonic pint, and pour the same beer in it and smell it. You have a completely different experience just from the shape of the glass. It's really cool.
right, which is
It's made,
why I typically use a teku, because
yes,
the shape of it allows it to breathe and it funnels that aroma right up your snout.
exactly. That's why I also don't like juice glasses for flights, because there's no like aromatic thing going on at all. And I
Yep.
saw once somewhere, and I don't know how many times I've said it since I've seen it. How much wine would you sell if you served it in an iced tea glass?
Right. That's the amazing thing. My wife and I went, and my wife and my sister in law have done this several times. Gone for wine tastings, and I'll say, "Try it in this glass." Now try it in this glass, and it's amazing how much different the aromas are, and two, the flavor is if it's in the
Mhm.
proper glass. It's amazing.
Because so much of your flavor is your aromatics.
Yep.
That's super awesome. And I think that that a lot of um, there's a lot lost in the experience of beer for that reason, because everybody thinks the shaker pints are the cheap, easy way to go, and they don't understand what they're losing there.
Yep.
So what I try to advise people with limited space is a nonic pint and a tulip or a teku or a something for your expensive beers. And those two, this one being stackable, your nonic pint is stackable. You still have to figure out the hang it from the foot or whatever for the tulip glass or the take the
Yep.
glass or the nicer glass. But if you're going to buy a beer at an expensive wine price, you need an expensive wine experience. And you can pour beers in a wine glass, and you'll still
Yeah.
have a much, much better experience. That beer you're drinking today, I wouldn't put that in a shaker glass if you paid me to.
Now,
It would
so
it would be a
this
crime.
style of beer, yeah, this style of beer, anything that's barrel aged, I tend to either put in a teku or I put it into. I do have some proper like tulip style glasses,
Mhm.
but
Or snip.
yeah, I actually prefer these because of the longer stem, so my hot sweaty hand doesn't over increase the temperature of the beer because I
Mhm.
like my barrel aged beers at room temperature. Um,
Mhm.
I think they provide the most at room temperature or maybe a degree or two below because I think at that temperature they provide the best flavor and the best aroma that you're going to get out of it. If it's too cold, you're going to mute it. If it's too warm, you're probably not going to enjoy it. It's still going to be good flavor, but you're probably not going to enjoy it as you would if it was at room temperature for this style of beer.
And it's interesting. That brings up another topic with my setting up programs in hotels. You really have to re-educate everybody, particularly the bartenders that are used to um, the tradition that the chilled glass or the frosted glass um, is a step up in service, and explain that that frost is not good for my beer. That my experience with that craft beer is not what that brewmaster had in mind if I'm being served in a frosted glass.
Yep.
And you don't want to take up that ice chest cooler space with those glasses either. It's been an interesting road. Sorry, an interesting road in that regard. Um, because you really have to retrain, explain, and then experience. Everybody needs to experience that same contrast of shaker glass to good glass, of too cold to room temperature to
Yep.
really experience it. And when I'm talking to people, like if I host dinners and things at some of these nice places, I often start with there's two different schools of thought and moments for beer. One is refreshment, right? I just want that cold glass when I finish mowing the lawn or when I'm at the beach or when I'm just overheated and I want something refreshing and cold. And then there's the experience when I actually want to take the time and experience the flavors and really look into what is this art, what is this craft, what is this that has been created for me. And I think that there's a reason the mountains turn blue on the Coors cans, and that's the point at which it's maximally refreshing, but that's not the point at which you're going to find flavor.
Right, right. So one of the things I've noticed over the past probably 5 or so years is that a lot of the craft brewers are not only putting the style of glass that the beer is most optimally served in, but they're also starting to put the optimal serving temperature for the beer on
Temperature.
it,
Nice.
which is fantastic for people who might not know. Oh, this beer should go into a tulip style glass and it should be served at 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 7 to 13 degrees Celsius for my metric friends. Uh, and if you drink it above or below that, you're not going to have the optimal experience. Yeah, it's still going to be a good beer because if it's a good beer, it's going to be a good beer no matter what. But the optimal flavor profile as set up by the brewer or the brewery or by the beer judges style guide or whatever you're going by, it's not gonna steer you wrong.
No, and I've also seen I don't know if you've seen some of the Boulevard bottles. They've actually got the sensory experience broken down in a little spider web that
Yeah.
talks about what your experience could be. And it also brings to mind a Great Divide Brewing Company. Brian has been putting cheese pairings on his beer labels for
Oh,
as
that's
long as
fantastic.
yeah, long as I've known them.
Yeah, I
Um,
haven't had a Great Divide beer in several years. I mean, partially because I haven't been able to get back over the border in a couple of years, but
well, when the world stopped,
yeah, yeah. So that's one of the things. So I'm originally from the United States, and I moved to Canada a few years ago. Um, so it's been a whole new learning curve for me up here because yeah, there's the same styles of beers, but they're all going to be different because I'm used to, oh, I know what, I know what Great Divide puts out, and I know what, I know what Deschutes puts out, and I know what, like Central Waters of Wisconsin, I know what their beers, what they taste like, and I know, oh, I like this style, this style, this style from these guys. Coming up here, it's been a whole new experience for me. It's because like it's starting over for the most part, because it's like, okay, they make this style of beer, but how is it going to compare to what I'm used to tasting, and
Mhm.
is it going to fall within something that I actually like? It's pretty interesting.
Well, I think that that is a marvelous journey. You're literally taking all of the skills and all of the palette that you developed before and starting on an adventure of unknown. I mean,
Yep.
that's pretty awesome. And I would imagine that this show is a great opportunity to learn more about some of those breweries that you're adventuring.
Yeah, so for the most part, when I'm talking about a style of beer on this show, I choose a craft beer from Ontario,
Mhm.
because I think they're up to like 900 craft breweries here in Ontario
Wow,
alone.
that's
Yeah,
impressive.
so there's a fair amount to choose from. So it's not like I don't have the opportunity for a style that I'm looking for, and I tend to try and not have the same style of beer from the same brewery on multiple episodes, or even the same the same brewery on multiple episodes. There is some overlap because obviously you're limited by seasonal and whatever is available at the time. But yeah, it's been nice. So a lot of the time when I'm talking about a style of beer, I'm experiencing that beer for the first time as an Ontario craft beer, as opposed to something I'd get in the States.
Nice. Yeah, that's super cool. I think my start in beer was on the distribution tier. And so it's interesting to me too to think about the fact that the push and the focus on local right now is really allowing some of the smaller breweries to shine. And the question of what is being distributed that is available everywhere that is not local is always an interesting question. I don't know if you're seeing the same distribution consolidation that we are, but it's getting harder and harder for regional brands or national brands to succeed because of the focus on local. Are you seeing more focus, hyper focus on local there too?
Yeah, there's a hyper focus on local. I mean, so the liquor laws in Ontario are a little different than they are in most places in the States. And before the pandemic, they couldn't ship beer via mail or anything. Um, but when the pandemic hit, they changed the liquor law so that all these smaller craft breweries could ship their beer anywhere in the province. So
Nice.
we were able to get beers from places that are 6-7 hours north of us that we would never get to normally, and try their beers because of the pandemic. That's actually one of the positive things that's come out of this whole lockdown situation for the world is it's allowed these smaller breweries to have an online presence where they can sell their beer to a wider audience. So you've got people like me who live in Southwest Ontario who are trying beers from breweries that are as far north as you can possibly be in Canada, where they're still brewing beer. It's great.
Mhm. So do you think some of these e-commerce loosenings of restrictions and incentives for the breweries to reach out farther, do you think some of that will stick?
Oh, I think it'll all stick because um, the up here beer is heavily regulated and heavily taxed. So they're making a lot more. The government's making a lot more profit in taxation than they were before. So I'm sure if they're pretty much going to leave everything as is after everything opens up, because you can't really put that genie back in the bottle, and they're making a lot more money for tax base wise. So I think they're pretty happy with that.
Well, I wonder if your liquor stores and your distributors are going to be happy with that because that's interesting, weird competition and taking. Yeah.
Well, up here, the liquor stores and the beer stores are all government controlled. So, it's similar to the liquor laws like in Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
where you have to go to specialized
State
stores,
store.
and they have.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah, it's the same thing here. They're province stores. So we have one that's called the LCBO, which is the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. That's the name of the stores, and it's all government controlled. And then the other one they had that sells just beer is called the Beer Store, which is a collaboration between a private company and the LCBO, the province government, to sell just beer. So it's all government controlled anyway. So I mean, in terms of government profits, they're basically just switching it from one set of hands to another set of hands that's bringing it in for them.
So it's really the on-premise, the bars and the restaurants that will or won't be able to get new stuff, different stuff, and that's where the distributors may
Yes.
lose some of their power.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where you're going to see it. Although, I don't know. I don't know how much of an effect it's actually going to have up here. I mean, that's yet to be seen.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, I'll be curious too, to see how the pandemic affects the opening of new breweries. There was an article written by one of your Canadian comrade writers. The topic of the article was, aren't there are we done? Are there too many breweries? And the answer was, at the end of the day, after he analyzes all the data and statistics, no, there's plenty of room for more breweries. And so I'll be curious to see, particularly if a lot of these regulations stay lifted or changed, how that's going to affect the new breweries as that start now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that will be an interesting thing to watch play out. I mean, there's a lot of dynamic stuff that's in flux right now. There's a lot that could change. There's a lot that might change. There's a lot that might not change. I mean, it's going to be. I think once the pandemic is done, I think it's going to be an interesting thing to sit back and watch.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Indeed. As I told you when we were talking about doing this piece, we just started, my friend and I, a website called startabrewery.com. That's a free resource for anybody who's starting a brewery. And it's interesting to see the response and reaction of people, of the general public, to really more breweries. But there's no shortage of people, especially when you lost your job. And we saw the same thing in like 2008. When the economy crashes and people lose their jobs, all of a sudden it's an opportunity to do what they would enjoy.
Yep.
And you have more of a focus on, I want to do what I love, I want to enjoy my work, I want to shift. And so I'll be curious to see how many new breweries are driven by the pandemic.
Yeah, and that would be an interesting thing to see. I mean, I totally get that. If for whatever reason I were to lose my job, I don't know that I would go back into the same field that I'm in. I might try
Mm-hmm.
something different, And if that was to try and start a brewery, then I might try and start a brewery.
It's an interesting world, and I think the beer bars, um, the places that really cater to those with an understanding and love of the craft. I think that those locations and those destinations are also going to be a little bit at risk with e-commerce. If you, as a private citizen, can just order crazy rare beers from the brewery in Timbuktu and it arrives at your door, you don't have to go seek them out through somebody else anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's going to shift things a lot of different ways. And I hope the beer bars won't go the way of the dodo. I hope they'll stick around.
Yeah, well, I know I'm kind of the exception to the rule because I will do both. I will order those rare beers, but I will also, when I'm allowed to, I will go to different breweries because I like the experience of going to the brewery, talking to the staff, and when possible, talking to the brewers that work there. If they're available, hey, just sitting down and chewing the fat with them and learning about their experience. I mean, I don't know if I'm an exception to the rule or if I am the rule, whatever it is. But I actually prefer going to the places and talking to the people who make the beer. I think it's a lot more interesting than, yeah, okay, I can buy this beer, but I'd really like to know more about where it's made and who made it and why they decided to make it.
And I think the same is true for the beer bars, where it's fun to hang out with people who know what they're talking about, and you can talk shop because you
Yes.
have a common interest.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
think there's
Most
a
definitely.
really neat niche for that.
Yep. All right. Well, we have hit 45 minutes, so we are
Okay.
technically at the end of my episode. I'll take this time to say I thank anybody who watches this. If you liked it, please subscribe, hit the like button. If you want to be notified when a new episode comes out, please click the little bell. If you have any questions for me or for Laura, please leave them in the comments and I'll be sure to forward them. If you'd like to make a suggestion for a beer style that gets reviewed on a later show, please do that as well. Laura, tell people again about your website and anything else that you have going on.
Sure. I have a couple of different beer missions. Startabrewery.com is our most recent one that we've started. I also have a consulting business called Customized Craft Beer Programs, and that's customizedcraftbeerprograms.com. And if you're interested in big beers and the festival, that's bigbeersfestival.com. I don't know that we're going to be doing January of 2022, but we'll certainly be resuming after that if we don't.
I look forward to that because I like big beers and I like barley wines.
There you go. You need to be in Breckenridge in January. That's the bottom line there.
Yep. Well, that might just have to happen. All right. Well, everybody, this is it. The end of the show. I'm Rob from the internet. Cheers. What?